Hi, and welcome to Coping During the COVID Crisis. I'm Janet Gross. We've been dealing with the world in pandemic mode for such a long time now. Nothing has been normal, not even those things in life that are inevitable. Even grief, loss, and death have been pulled from comforting arms and familiar surroundings. For many, this COVID world has made those hurts and tragedies almost too much to bear. But today we're going to talk about some things that might help and places to find that help. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us to talk and walk through those concerns and the stress of those hard times. It is, difficult for many people in many different situations, whether it's the loss of someone or something, job, economy, all those things.
And people have lost a lot. We've talked about this loss, in other episodes where they are grieving the loss of a loved one, grieving the loss of their health, grieving the loss of jobs. And a lot of the loss that we experienced in our community happened early on.
Yeah.
We had our early losses, back in March and April. And it's important that we as a community not forget, that people, their grief doesn't stop as everyone else starts to move into phase 2 and phase 3 and whatever that may be. People can experience difficult times. People can experience big hardships during COVID, but then there are people who have experienced loss, the death of a loved one. And it's important that we not forget and leave them behind. They're still in their grief. This is months into it. Here we are 6 and 7 months later. We can't just send that condolence card and that call initially in the days that we find out that someone has passed. 6 months into it, we need to stay there with them. We need to call them. We need to reach out to them and say, are you okay? I know it's been 6 months since you've lost your loved one. I'm here for you. People need to know that we still care, that we're still connected, that we're still there. People can't think that they've lost someone, they're still carrying the grief of having lost a spouse or a sibling or a loved one, and everyone else is moving on. We need to stay there with them and be there for them.
And even as the phases change, there are more things you can do to help. And not just think, oh, they're probably over it. No.
Yeah.
Even in a normal world, you don't get over
even in a
this.
typical circumstance,
Yes.
it takes a good year to grieve the loss of someone. It's a year of firsts, the first anniversaries, the first birthdays, the first holidays without someone present. We haven't gone through that first year of without yet. So as these individuals go through these different marking points, these different benchmarks of anniversaries and birthdays and holidays, we need to remember them. We need to be there for those who have lost loved ones. It's not an easy year. It's never easy to lose a loved one. And there's something extra burdensome and heavy with this year of having lost someone because it's in the public limelight. It's something that everyone is mindful of. And so with that, we need to be mindful of those who have lost loved ones and continue to reach out to them.
And certainly the camaraderie of having someone to go through big things like this through all your life. For many people who've been married and lost a spouse or a parent or something, they're there for you in these times, and all of a sudden now you're alone.
Right. And to be in this alone isolation, other times when you've lost someone, people can go to your home and hug you and comfort you and bring you, meals.
Food,
and right now, in addition to grieving, there's an isolation that is also being experienced. And perhaps there's that physical distancing that is a necessary component. But that doesn't mean that we can't be social with one another and reach out and that our hearts can still be connected with those who are grieving.
And I'm sure that during this time, other losses also actually might even be worse, like the loss of a job.
Right.
If you haven't found another job, then it's just getting worse because now you can't pay for this and now you can't pay for that, and you're probably down on yourself because you can't find a job.
Right.
I mean, I know people in this situation, that's why I'm saying it.
Absolutely, and we here in this area, in this community, we have a number of people who have lost jobs because of the industry that we have here. Here we have a service-oriented industry who has been impacted significantly. So that's a significant percentage of the people in our lives who are without work. On a national scale, the unemployment rate is currently at 8.4% from what I understand. But here in our community, it's higher because of the nature of the industry that we have, that of the service industry. And so we're going to statistically just know more people who are impacted, who still have bills to pay, who still have responsibilities and obligations, who perhaps still have mouths to feed and families to take care of. And to the extent that those who have the ability to be there for them and help out in a certain way, it's important that we do that.
And not forget them. We might not be able to help them in every way, but certainly to stand by them, to look out for them, to try to help in any way we can. Yeah, and I know this comes up, and we'll probably talk about this later. But when people call for a counselor, or to talk to a counselor at the University of Holy Cross, y'all have such a special thing set up, and let's talk about that for a minute.
We really do. The Mary Knights of Holy Cross have always been there for the community. In their 104 years of service to the community, have always wanted to be there to help those in need. And this is no different. The Counseling Center, the Thomas E. Chambers Counseling and Training Center, is continuing to offer services through telebehavioral health, through telecounseling, free of charge to residents of the state of Louisiana. All they would need to do is call the number that we have on the screen. They contact the counseling center. Our administrative assistant takes that call, triages it to the clinical director, who will then assign it to a counselor in training, and then services can begin with whatever the presenting issue might be.
Okay, and that's going to be through
That's throughout the duration of this pandemic.
And many of the things that we are going to talk about in this show are issues that are serious, the things that come out of grief and loss, depression, and a lack of even wanting to be with people, just the things that come out of.
Right, when people are grieving, when people have lost something significant, someone significant in their lives, anxiety, depression, fear are very natural things that set in, and perhaps it can be overwhelming for someone to be able to manage, these symptoms. So calling in and talking to a professional about it, or a counselor in training about it, perhaps can be helpful, because you can discern and navigate what's normal and what's typical. Yes, it is normal to grieve. It is normal to feel sad. It is normal to feel the loss of someone. But at what point does it now become something a little more clinical, where perhaps professional help might be of benefit, so that you can move forward and do the things that are necessary in your life?
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to, when we come back, we're going to talk with the Dean of the College of Counseling at the University of Holy Cross, and this service that is helping so many who are struggling to keep their heads up. So stay with us. When you lose someone, or even something, a shoulder to lean on, or a gathering of loved ones, is such a comfort. And in this pandemic, we often can't have that, and that can make everything seem so much worse. Joining us to talk about that is Dr. Carolyn White, the Dean of the College of Counseling, Business, and Education at the University of Holy Cross. A lot of these things we've been talking about make people feel so alone already, and now you add social distancing. That can be crushing to some people. What is the advice to help them through?
It really is. And, again, just helping them to stay centered and to realize that, this will eventually pass. Of course, as the time goes on, that's getting harder for people to accept too. And as you said, when they do lose a loved one, either from COVID or something else, the options for funerals, particularly the way we do them here, with the wakes and then the funerals that people are used to, that just becomes very problematic today because of the social distancing, and because people are concerned about, getting into a group. So where their friends before would gather, to help them, get through that period and be with them during that. They're hesitant now to do it, and of course, for good reason. New Orleans and the area here is great about, even after a funeral, during those days, they bring food and they visit with the family. And that's not always possible right now. And I think the older adults who are more vulnerable right now to COVID are really feeling this very strongly right now. But even young ones, I've had some students who have had family members who have died, and they're just devastated because they can't go and actually, view the body or be with the family. So the loss, the grief is just, that much more because of that.
And with that, you have individuals who have lost someone, and maybe they're not within the same household, and then you can't go and pay your respects, so you didn't get a chance or an opportunity to see them and to say goodbye. And so closure is not quite taking place in the way that it is therapeutic for people to do so. In New Orleans and in our community, as Dr. White was saying, we find closure by going to the wake, by going to the funeral, by going to the ceremony and celebrate the person's life. And since those things aren't happening, we hear of someone's passing, the days go on, just the small, intimate people can go and pay their respects, but everyone else, it's at a distance. And so it just makes it that much more difficult.
And because it is so large here, even as restrictions ease, it's, the celebrations are big and,
right.
Just comforting and close.
Yes.
That's right.
Do you think there's also some guilt in this as we go through? I know that he would have wanted a bigger funeral, or I know that she really wanted this person to be there, or, that we could have had this done. Do you think there's any guilt there, along with the, I know we can't because what if we have people infected or whatever?
There's guilt, and I think there's also anger, that, this is happening, and we're helpless to do anything about it except accept it and, do that process of grieving and try to talk it out with those who we can be around, or we can, be on like this with a Zoom session where, and we encourage families to do that, where they can at least connect by seeing the other person.
In New Orleans, family is so big here. We're not just a nuclear family of mother, father, and children. We have extended family, and we have godmothers and godfathers, and people that are very intimately tied into a family. When you have a restriction of, let's say, 10 people who can attend a funeral, there are a lot of closely connected people who are shut out by just merely who they are in relationship to the person who has passed, yet feel the grief just like anyone else would.
Sure. And
just that right there is hurtful and painful in knowing that you can't participate. You understand, you get it, but it doesn't change the emotionality of it all.
Mm-hmm. So what can counseling do for people who are in those situations where they feel this myriad of just emotions and stress? Talking it through, is that it? Giving advice?
Talking it through. Advice, everyone has to grieve in their own way, so we can't really advise them how to grieve, because what works for one person may not work for another. So we talk it through. We help them find what they need to bring that closure, as Dr. Salgado said, and to be able to realize that this is part of life, that we can't avoid that grieving. We have to go through it. And being around others, to be able to talk to others, to be able to process what they're feeling is what is so important, rather than just stuffing it inside and saying, oh, well, I'm just going to go on, with my life. That usually doesn't work. It usually comes back to, to disturb them and then cause anxiety and depression and other things. So to help them realize that they just have to go through it, and that it does get better with time, doesn't ever completely go away because you've lost someone, but it does get better, and they find coping skills that work for them.
I would think the coping skills now would have to be, you have to reach out a little bit too now, because just like you were saying that, and normally we would just gather around people and just comfort them and hug them, but without that, that person is now responsible for kind of, could we have lunch? Could we, or could we talk?
If someone has lost someone, if you're the person who's grieving and you're isolated, it's incumbent upon you to reach out to someone and say, I am withdrawn, I'm isolated, I need help.
Whether that's a step, isn't
and that's a step, and that's a step, whether it's with a family member or a friend or a professional. It's also incumbent upon those in the community, family members and friends, to not forget and realize, this cousin lost someone 6 months ago. Let me call and reach out. How are you doing today? Because they're still experiencing the loss. And so we need to be mindful of that and not move on and forget. We need to consistently reach out, and those who have lost someone to have the courage to reach out and ask for that help.
And I'm sure that sometimes that one phone call, that one text, that one, praying for you, whatever you do to help someone goes a long way toward hope, maybe?
Yes, definitely. And to realize that, yes, I can get through this, and that, the feeling of grieving is painful, so no one likes that. So to help them to realize, that, yes, this is something that you're going through, and, there's just no shortcut around it. I think, too, that particularly if it's someone who loses a significant other, that is just the two of them right now, as Dr. Salgado again said, we're not with extended family, we're just with, very few people. And that becomes really, really hard, because not only is the person not there, they're not getting that touch, they're not getting that conversation. So to be able to reach out and to be able to connect, and again, it's not over when the funeral's over. We need to realize that people are going to continue to grieve, and we need to stay in touch with them much longer than just a couple of weeks. It doesn't just go away that quickly.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. White, for joining us, and we'll be back in a moment with more on the psychological aspects of dealing with grief and loss in this time of COVID. There are so many issues that come with loss and grief: loss of a loved one, a job, the ability to support the family, and of course the loss of control. That's okay. There are so many issues that come with loss and grief: loss of a loved one, a job, the ability to support the family, and of course the loss of control. So what can someone do to get through that, to cope, especially during COVID? We want to bring in Dr. Lillian Range, professor of psychology at the University of Holy Cross, to talk with us about that. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Sure. I know that we have been talking for this whole show about how to deal with grief, especially when you can't rely on the comfort of others as much anymore. The big gatherings and things like that really help you through those initial stages. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that people have.
Yes.
And so,
It's a very difficult time of life.
right, how do you help them through this particularly to encourage them to maybe seek other ways or to do things that will help them?
I think your question reflects this natural tendency that we have, that we want to help people, especially people that we see are in pain or suffering. And I applaud that. I think that's a good human quality. I want to emphasize that people grieve very differently. There's not one pattern. You can't just look up and say, oh, you're in week number 3, you should be at this stage. You're week number 12, you should be at this stage. Everybody has a different way they go through the grieving process. I think if I wanted to comfort someone, I would try to verbalize my concern and my caring for them. I would try to avoid telling them to do something or not do something, or they're going to feel better later. I would just try to be with them, to comfort them.
Those words are often not helpful at all. You're going to get over this. Shut up is what
Right,
really
to Dr. Range's point, one of the worst things that a person could say is everything will be all right, everything will be okay. That doesn't help.
Not comforting.
It's not comforting, and just listening and being present for the person is all that perhaps is required at times.
Mm-hmm. Just sitting there and listening?
Mm-hmm. I think another thing that happens to some people is they're stymied. They don't know what to say, and they say nothing. That's also, I think, bad. You've got to somehow, even awkwardly, acknowledge the loss, and
right.
and just try to be a listening presence.
And that listening presence is to continue in the weeks and months to follow. As Dr. Range said, you're not assessing you're in week 3, you should be going through this. You're in week 12, you should be going through this.
Right.
We need to be that listening presence for someone throughout the duration of their grief. And as other people move on, they're still in it. And people in this community lost someone back in March and April and then throughout the pandemic. We need to come back and revisit weeks and months after. How are you doing? Mm-hmm. I'm here for you.
And I guess an occasional phone call, even if we're allowed, depending on the restrictions at the time, to go and just to sit with them every so often. It's not just,
right.
Here's, like you said earlier, here's a card, here's a thing of cookies, whatever.
There's a way of being there for someone while maintaining a safer distance, that physical distance. It means that we can still be there. Doesn't mean that we have to run away and never be in contact with someone. There are ways of doing it and still being there for someone.
Dr. Range, I'm sure that creativity would come into this as well, being there for people.
Right. I think a phone call is great, and I think in this era, we schedule phone calls. Can I call you on Thursday at 6? Can I call you on Tuesday at 10? Whatever is maybe one way to reach out and make a contact.
Yeah, with that scheduling of a phone call, it's true. It's something that in previous times we didn't schedule a phone call, but now we find ourselves doing that. And then you have the looking forward to, oh, I'm expecting a call from my nephew or from my grandchild or from whomever this Sunday or this Thursday. And that expectation and leading up to it can be therapeutic for someone who is experiencing isolation and grief during a time like this.
The preparation itself.
Yeah, and during that phone call, just try to be a listening presence. You don't. There's not a particular agenda. You can talk about pizza. You can talk about whatever that person needs to talk about.
Is it good to talk about what's going on? Because sometimes you have lulls. Is it good to talk about what's going on in your life, or should you not do that?
I think that's all right, as long as you're a listening presence. And as long as you've acknowledged the grief, the loss, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think that people appreciate the effort. People know that you're extending yourself. and that's what they need.
And with that, when people realize people are thinking about me, I'm on people's minds and hearts. I'm important and I'm of value enough so that they're reaching out and scheduling a phone call. They're calling me, they're texting me. That lifts a person's spirit, and they don't feel abandoned and pushed aside and forgotten.
And I guess the key here is to actually make the phone call. Don't get busy and not do
Right.
that. Would be devastating, I think.
Right. It's a priority.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would like to say that sometimes there's a period right after the loss, or after you find out that that person's on your mind. But another important period is just later, a little while later, after the rush of people have said stuff and called. Then the next week or the following week, when not very many people are calling or texting or anything, is when it would be another good time to reach out.
That's very important, because there is that lull. There is that time where people have stopped and people have moved on with their daily routines. Yet the person who is grieving, week 3, week 4, month 6, is still struggling, and they need to hear from those around them.
Is it good to talk about the person, the loved one who's lost, to talk about, or do you bring it up a lot? Or
I would say so. Talk about memories that you have with that person. A comforting memory. Of the time that we did fill in the blank. And to just recall that it is a life that is celebrated and not necessarily only grief that's taking place.
Right, not just we're going to miss them, but you remember the time.
Right.
When.
Right.
I think that's key, because a lot of people don't know what to say. You want to call, you want to comfort, you don't want to say the wrong thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss goes a long way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, Dr. Range, we thank you so much for talking through this with us and helping us along the way. We appreciate you joining us.
I appreciate you doing this program.
Sure. And Dr. Roy, you have some tips for us as we...
Yes, and even when we're dealing with grief and loss, we still are amidst a pandemic, and we need to take time for ourselves. The person who is experiencing the loss, the person who is needing to reach out, take that time. Eliminate the noise. There's a lot of noise out there in the news and the media. We need to kind of just get away from that. Embrace the silence. Sometimes in the silence we can come up with comforting ideas of either from our higher power, from God, to get us through a difficult time. Pray and meditate during this time. There's perhaps no better time than to connect with your higher power than when you're grieving in the loss of someone. Go for walks. That helps to get you out there, get you moving be with other people, and never give up hope. Always maintain hope. That gets us through the most difficult of times.
Mm-hmm. And praying can lift you up like that with giving you hope and all those things.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, and your colleagues at the University of Holy Cross for joining us. And thank you for watching. We want to help as we are all coping during the COVID crisis.